Today we'll call Heather Williams to the stand.
Stand, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You be seated.
Could you please state your name and spell it for the benefit of the court reporter?
First name is Heather, Heather. Last name is Williams, Williams.
And where are you employed?
The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, located in Milwaukee.
And what is your current position at the crime laboratory in Milwaukee?
I am a firearms and tool mark examiner.
And how long have you been employed with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab as a firearms tool mark examiner?
A little over 5.5 years.
And what does that mean to be a firearms or tool mark examiner?
As a firearms and tool mark examiner, I conduct examinations of firearms and firearms-related evidence, such as fired cartridge cases and fired bullets.
And is there any specialized education or training that you have done pertaining to your job as a firearms or tool mark examiner?
Yes, I first hold a Bachelor's of Science degree in Law Enforcement and Justice Administration with a minor in Forensic Science that included a 525-hour internship at the DuPage County Forensic Science Center. I also completed the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory Firearms and Tool Mark Examiner Training Program. It's an apprentice-type training program, much like an electrician or a plumber, where you get both hands-on and classroom-like instruction.
And what exactly is firearms identification?
Firearms identification is the comparison analysis of fired evidence, compares bullets to barrels and cartridge cases to firearms.
And what process is used when examining a firearm that is submitted to your section?
One of the first tasks that we perform when a firearm is submitted to the firearms section is called a function test. The purpose of the function test is to first make sure that the firearm is a functional firearm and that it is also safe to test fire. During that function test, I'll check the condition of the firearm along with all safeties that are associated with that firearm.
And then what do you do next when examining that firearm?
Once I've determined that that firearm is safe to test fire, I will test fire the firearm. This is done to make sure that the firearm is working properly and the way that the manufacturer intended for it to work. And also instances in which we have fired evidence, those test fired bullets and cartridge cases that are produced are then compared to that fired evidence to see if they were or were not fired in the submitted firearm.
And did you become involved in a case in your professional capacity regarding Kyle Rittenhouse, Joseph Rosenbaum, and Anthony Huber?
Yes, I was.
And how did you become involved with that case?
I was assigned to work that laboratory case.
I'd like to show you what is previously marked and admitted as State's Exhibit 28. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do. I recognize that as the firearm that I analyzed for this specific case. How I recognize that is on the firearm in silver marker, I have indicated that laboratory case number associated with the case, the item designation of that item, my initials, and the date that that was examined.
So is it my understanding that you would have actually examined this exact firearm and fired it?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I think that's good. Thank you. So what do you use to test fire it with?
We're going to use ammunition that is part of our reference collection. When we choose the ammunition for our test fires, we try to choose it as close to the fired evidence that's submitted to that case.
What is a cartridge?
A cartridge is unfired ammunition that's going to consist of 4 components. You'll have the actual cartridge case, you'll have the primer, you'll have the propellant or gunpowder, and then you'll have the projectile or bullet.
So what is a cartridge case?
A cartridge case is a portion of a fired cartridge that is left over after it's been fired in a firearm. You may have commonly heard it referred to as brass.
And how do you determine if cartridge cases were fired in the same firearm?
You're going to look at markings that are transferred onto the fired cartridge cases during the firing process. Those are the markings that we look at to determine if they were or were not fired in the same firearm. And then instances when we have a firearm, we're able to determine if they were or were not fired in a specific firearm.
So what's the difference between a cartridge and a bullet?
A cartridge, like I said, is going to be the full unfired ammunition. So it's going to be those 4 components. A bullet is just one of those 4 components. So it's the projectile portion that you'll see on an unfired cartridge.
So what is a fired bullet?
A fired bullet is going to be the bullet that is expelled through the barrel of a firearm. It's going to have impressions that are going to be left on that from the rifling or that spiral pattern that's going to be within that bore of the barrel.
So how can you determine if bullets were fired in the same firearm?
You're going to look at those rifling impressions that are left on a fired bullet from the barrel that it's been fired through.
Is your crime lab accredited?
Yes, we are.
And who accredits your crime lab?
We are accredited through ANAB, ANAB. It stands for the American National Association Standards National Accreditation Board.
And are there any quality controls or procedures that are used, particularly in your discipline at your crime lab?
Yes, in the firearms section, we have a 3-step quality control procedure. The first step is called the verification process. This is when any type of identification, elimination, or inconclusive results of fired evidence is then looked at by a second qualified examiner in the section. Once that verification process has been completed, there is then a peer review process in which all notes and reports are looked at to make sure everything's clear, complete, and accurate. That last step is going to be administrative review. That is going to be when a supervisor will once again go through all reports and notes to make sure everything is clear, complete, and accurate before the report is submitted to the submitting agency.
I'll let you is marked as States Exhibit 72. Do you recognize that?
I do. This is the report that I issued for this specific case. I know that based upon the laboratory case number, as well as it has my name as well as my signature, and then it also has information on the second page with my initials showing that I did complete both of these pages of the report.
Is that a true and accurate copy of the report that you issued in this case?
Yes, it is.
I'd like to move Exhibit 72 into evidence.
I don't have an objection.
Let's you is marked as States Exhibit 71. Can you please explain what this is?
This is one of the fired cartridge cases that I analyzed for this specific case. I can tell that based upon the laboratory sticker, the yellow sticker here. This has the laboratory case number associated with this case, the item designation, as well as my initials and date that I took this into my custody. I also have that information on the additional packaging for this specific item, and then we also have that information on the actual cartridge case itself.
So which was the bullet that was fired allegedly by the defendant? Where would that be in that packet?
This is just going to contain one of the fired cartridge cases. So this is a portion of a cartridge that was fired. So this is the portion that is ejected from the firearm.
So that the thing in the top of that threefold, that is what was presented to you as an already fired cartridge. That's not one that you fired.
Correct, yes. This is a piece of submitted evidence for this specific case.
So what kind of, is that a true and accurate copy of how you would have packaged up that particular cartridge casing and all the other elements in Exhibit 71?
Yes, I know that this is how I packaged this piece of evidence because at each one of the heat sealed seals, it's going to have my initials as well as the date that I actually sealed this piece of evidence.
I'd like to move Exhibit 71 into evidence.
Objection? No, sir. Steve?
So after you test fire the weapon, the gun that we saw, then what happens next in your analysis?
So what I will do then is I will compare those test fired cartridge cases to the fired evidence cartridge cases for this specific case. I do that by using what is called a comparison microscope. These are two microscopes that are then connected by an optical bridge. It allows myself as an examiner to look at two objects simultaneously side by side. That way I'm able to see the markings that are transferred from the firearm during that firing process on the cartridge cases to look to see if the submitted evidence was or was not fired in the submitted firearm.
So what did you do in this particular case?
In this particular case, there were 8 fired cartridge cases that were submitted. Each one of those 8 fired cartridge cases were then compared to the test fire cartridge cases that I produced so that I could be able to determine if they were or were not fired in the submitted firearm.
So you were submitted 8 of the, if you hold up Exhibit 71 briefly, you were given 8 of those cartridges on top?
Yes, 8 fired cartridge cases, just like this one here, was submitted for this specific case and analyzed.
And did you find that all 8 of those cartridges were fired through the weapon that Detective Antaramian showed you?
Yes, I was able to determine that the 8 fired cartridge cases submitted in this case was fired in the submitted firearm.
And that was by comparing each one to the test fired projectiles that you fired?
Correct, yes.
I have nothing further, thank you.
Cross-examine.
Well, thank you.
You may step down, ma'am.